The universe we know is held together by specific rules. We call these rules the laws of physics. If even just one of these rules got changed slightly, just by a decimal point or even less, the universe we know would change drastically, not even allowing grander structures like planets and stars to be formed like we are used to, or creating other things in their place we can't even imagine. Or at least I can't without the use of psychedelics. No one knows who wrote the laws of physics or where they come from. Well, that's all fine and dandy, but what does that have to do with Magic the Gathering? We may not know who wrote the laws of physics, but we do know who designed the fundamental rules of Magic. I, together with 250,000 other people, watched Ristic Studies' video Games Within Games, A History of Forgetful Fish, about the Magic fan format Dandan. At the beginning of that essay, Sam put a quote by Richard Garfield that reads,
"One of the things I really like about games is that many times, once the designer has designed them, people take the ideas beyond where the designer anticipated."
And that holds true. For all the official formats and meticulously crafted set releases, there is a corner of the Magic universe that stands apart. This quote inspired me to look further, beyond the sanctioned formats, and try to shed lights on some other ways to play the game that came to be, not by a wizard's decree, not by a Hasbro design team, but by the very players themselves. Even though Sam covered the Dandan format in his video essay better than I ever could, I still wanted to have it in this video because it's a fascinating story and an equally fascinating way of playing Magic. The format emerged not unlike its namesake card from a dark depth, the internet. I again highly encourage you to watch Sam's video on the topic if you haven't already, but the TLDR goes something like this. In 2016, a human called Nick Floyd posted his ideas for a couple of different two-player formats: Rock, Paper, Scissors, Trippin', and Forgetful Fish, which became known as the Dandan we love and play today. But the initial responses were not there. Nobody wanted to try out these proposed formats, but Floyd keeps posting, and finally, people pick up the deck. If you can't already tell, I have a special relationship with Dandan. The card was in one of the first packs I opened as a kid, and the vision of a giant fish rising from the dark to devour me has haunted me for the better part of my life. When me and my cousins went out on boats on a family trip as kids, we would joke about the Dandan circling below us. If this image does not give you at least mild thalassophobia, you are a stronger human than I am. Now, a print of Drew Tucker's original artwork decorates my wall, and an abstract rendition of it adorns my skin. I even designed an unofficial Dandan secret lair to give out to people at conventions. Dandan is a very fun format. It is played like any other 60-card format with 2 players. You start with 7 cards in hand and 20 life, which equates perfectly to 5 hits from a Dandan. The difference to normal Magic, though, is that you share one deck with your opponent. This means you each draw from the same library and also share the graveyard. And this tiny change is what makes the format work, and warp a lot of the cards in a deck from being unplayable or just okay in other formats to being extremely powerful in this one. I already told you the namesake card of this game variant was Dandan, a big 4-power 1-toughness fish with island home. It can't attack unless defending player controls an island, and is sacrificed when you control no islands. But that's only half of the name given to it by Nick Floyd all these years ago. The second card that's integral to Dandan's intricate play pattern is Memory Lapse. Memory Lapse counters a spell, but instead of putting it into the graveyard, the countered spell is put back on top of the library, causing the next player that draws access to it. In a format like Dandan, where players share this library, this opens up a whole new world of possible strategies. The top of the deck is now a crucial zone to be manipulated and controlled. Cards like Brainstorm that lets you put multiple cards on top become mind games in itself. Who draws the next card? And the one after that? Every scry becomes a potential fate seal, every instant speed card draw a possible way to screw over the plans your opponent laid out for you. I love bringing my Dandan deck with me to Commander Night. In between rounds when the last 2 players are taking ages to kill each other, it's a fun way to pass the time. And since you only need the one deck, it feels kind of like a board game. One box of 80 cards is all you need. If for some reason you haven't played Dandan yet, give it a try. Or else! There are several lists online to find, and I'll link my own list below. But this is really something you can personalize and tweak to fit your own idea of fun once you played it a couple of times and got the gist of it. For instance, I don't like tutors or fetch lands in my list. While a well-timed fetch for a Mystic Sanctuary can put a specific spell on top of the deck to be drawn by whoever draws next, it also gives you perfect information about your opponent's hand while searching. But that's just my personal preference. What does your Dandan list look like? There are black versions of this game mode that utilize the shared graveyard and black's reanimation spells. Cards like Icarid, Stitcher's Supplier and Carrion Feeder provide the threats in this environment, while filling the graveyard simultaneously. A white version with a blue splash uses Lost Leonin as the only creature, trying to pin 10 poison counters on the opponent, while Lapse of Certainty is used as the memory lapse equivalent here. Necromancer by my friend Gregor is another weird iteration of the concept. A mono black deck with a lot of uncastable Craven Giants as the only creature in the deck forces you to jump through hoops to first get them into the graveyard, to later reanimate them and start getting hits in. A red-white version even envisions a burn mirror in which players cast lightning helixes and skull cracks until one of them successfully counts to 20. There are probably a lot more variants of this game that I'm missing, and how could I not? With countless playgroups around the world, there are bound to be so many game ideas that never leave their respective bubble. I'm still glad that some do. I don't have to tell you what Commander is. Chances are you're building a deck for it right now while this video plays in the background. But even if it's probably the most played format in all of Magic now, it's easy to forget that Commander came from humble beginnings. In 1996, a group of Alaskan players around Adam Staley came up with the idea of EDH, Elder Dragon Highlander. You're telling me an Elder Dragon this Highlander? You'd play a deck headed by a general, which could be one of the 5 Elder Dragons at the time: Nicol Bolas, Chromium, Vivictus Asmadi, Palladia Morse or Arcadis Saboth. The 100 card deck could contain only one copy of each card in the 99, evoking the 1986 cult classic movie Highlander.
There can be only one.
There were other versions of this Elder Dragon Highlander variant at that time, even mentioned in articles in the Duelist magazine by Wizards of the Coast. But this one is the one that gathered the most acceptance among players. When Sheldon Maneri, a level 5 judge at the time, learned about the format, he helped to spread the word among other judges and transformed it into something more recognizable to us now by opening the general slot of the deck to more legendary creatures. It eventually found its way to Scott Larrabee, the proto manager for Wizards of the Coast, who worked over the next couple of years to make EDH into an official format and rebranding it as Commander for obvious copyright reasons. The first release of Commander decks by Wizards of the Coast came in 2011 as an entry in Wizards' Summer of Multiplayer and featured 5 3-color decks. These decks introduced 51 brand new cards to all Eternal formats and laid the foundation for many more Commander products to come. The format would still be managed and curated by a different entity than Wizards of the Coast though. The Rules Committee and the group that supported them, the Commander Advisory Group, were held up by fans and people in the community, not by Wizards employees. When COVID hit in 2020, Wizards of the Coast partnered with Spelltable, a webcam-based way to play Magic with friends who aren't in the same room, making it possible to play Commander even if you couldn't meet in person at the time. This, without question, helped the format only grow in popularity throughout the pandemic. Now, Commander is almost synonymous with Magic. While classic 60-card formats bring in huge tournament-grinding crowds to big Magic events, you can bet that almost all of them carry at least one Commander deck. Just in case. The free play areas of Magic cons are as much Commander battlefields as the kitchen tables for a lot of playgroups. When I meet up with friends to play Magic, the format is implied, unless stated otherwise. And Wizards of the Coast knows that. Since it took off, the number of spells tailored for Commander, such as legendary creatures you could put in your command zone, exploded, even in non-Commander products. And this number isn't likely to slow down soon. After the ban announcement of a couple of cards in September of 2024, people from the Rules Committee as well as the Advisory Group got harassed over the decision and resigned. Following this, the remaining members of the CRC gave management of the format to the game design team of Wizards of the Coast.
EDH is dorky and fun. But ironically, EDH is in danger of transforming into the same kind of serious, streamlined structure that its original creators wanted to avoid.
Steve Heisler wrote this in 2013 for the AV Club, but I feel it rings even more true today than back in the early 2010s. If that's good or bad for Commander, or for that matter Magic as a whole, I couldn't tell you. But this fan-created game variant, probably like no other, shaped Magic into the game we play today. Okay, but if Commander is so great, why did they never do Commander 2? In the year 2011, a post on the website MTG Salvations popped up titled Variant Format Lands. In this post, a user named MikeG542 pitches a 2 to 4 player game with a shared deck consisting of only basic lands. The short thread concludes after only 4 replies, 2 of them by MikeG542 themselves. 1 year later, a Reddit post mentions the basic land game again and describes the rules as follows. Here, each player has a deck of 50 basic lands, 10 of each color. You can play 1 land per turn, and the lands have specific enter the battlefield effects.
Forest, draw a card. Plains, get a card from graveyard to hand. Mountain, Stone Rain. Swamp, opponent discards a card. Island, no ETB effect but can be pitched along with another land to act as a force of will to counter their play.
The goal of the game is to get 1 of each color basic land, or to get 5 of 1 color basic land. Another user chimes in with a different approach.
We play a variation of this at my shop. It's super fun. The only difference I can see between yours and ours is that we use a communal library, so everyone draws from the same deck of about 100 lands, and lands do slightly different things. Forest, you can play an extra land this turn. Island, draw a card. Mountain, Stone Rain. Swamp, target player discards. And Plains, your lands are indestructible until your next draw step.
In this version though, the only way to win is with 1 of each land in play, not with 5 of the same, because a hand with 5 forests would be an instant turn 1 win. A little while later, a different user returns with an updated version.
So this is a little old now, but my friends and I have taken your version and updated it a bit. The thought I would share. 75 card library, 15 of each land. Red, destroy target land. Blue, scry, look at the top card of the library, you may place it on the bottom. Black, target discards a card. Green, you may play an extra land of a land type you already have in play. White, during target's next turn, they can't cast the land type of your choice. We tried to make the game more interactive. The blue Fate Seal is really fun. Start with 5 cards each, draw every turn. The forests might become simply draw a card, need to test it. The play an extra land thing is just really boring after you drop your first forest. You might as well not play with forests.
So from the get-go it seems people are way more willing to test this little game variant than they will be with the first iteration of Dandan 4 years later. It is also probably this Reddit post that Skura later found before he got obsessed with the format. In an article on the Ultimate Guard website, he describes how he brought the format to perfection, playing it over and over and tweaking it ever so slightly to push interaction and strategy to its limit. In Skura's version, each player has their own deck of lands and you play it 1v1. The rules of the game are:
your starting deck is 10 of each basic, so 50 cards total. At the beginning of the game, you draw 5 cards. You draw 1 card every turn, except for the person on the play. You get 1 land drop per turn. There are no mulligans. Your goal is to assemble either 1 of each basic land, also known as domain, or 5 of a single basic on the board.
Some enter the battlefield abilities of the land in Skura's edit are a bit different though. A mountain still acts as a stone rain. A swamp is upgraded to a Thoughtseize, letting you peek at the opponent's hand and let them discard a card. Yes, this Thoughtseize can discard lands. The forest has a regrowth effect attached to it. You can put any card from your graveyard back into your hand when it enters. Now here is where it gets interesting. To give white a proper color identity, Skura changed the ETB effect of the plains to a land cloud shift.
When you play a Plains, you target 1 of your other non-Plains lands and reuse their effect. For the sake of clear gameplay, you cannot force a draw by blinking 2 Plains continuously.
And for the island, there are 2 effects.
If you have an island in hand, you can discard it alongside another land to counter an opposing land drop and its effect.
You can also counter someone's attempt to counter, as showcased in a little clip Skura recorded for the Ultimate Guard Instagram account. This counter mechanic mirrors the rules of the old forum posts, but to make it more interesting, Skura also gave the island a proper ETB effect of drawing a card.
In the past, I played Island as Scry 2, but it ultimately proved to be too weak and heavily discouraged ever deploying Island to the board.
When countering a land drop with an island, what information do you have though? You do know what land an opponent tries to destroy if you counter their mountain. You also know the card they want to fish back out from the graveyard before you counter their forest. You won't know what card they're gonna take from your hand when they drop a swamp though, because ultimately the target of the effect are you, like with the real Thoughtseize. If you want to counter their planes, you will know which land they're trying to flicker, but not what the respective target of that land will be once it comes back into play. It's easy to learn, but hard to master. Despite the simplicity of only 6 effects across 5 cards, the complexity unfolds once you play it a couple of times. Due to its simple rules, you can even show it to someone who's never played Magic before. The basic concept of game theory, like resource management and card advantage, are as essential to success here as they are in real Magic the Gathering. Skura's article includes some paragraphs talking about different strategies you could pursue, but I won't spoil you here. Go read it after you played some games with it, because it's the same as with Dandan. You'll feel way smarter discovering tricky interactions on your own. And you should play it. Games go super quick, and from all the formats showcased in this video, it's probably the one that's cheapest to assemble. If you're at home, you'll have a box of spare lands laying around. I know you, there's no point in denying it. If you're at a tournament or convention with limited play, there will be land stations ready to get turned into basic land decks. The same goes for most local game stores, but please, put the lands back after you played, just like you would in draft. Some people even have pimped out their basic lands, just as they would in any other constructed format. Skura himself has a deck full of beta basics. What suit of lands would you put together? If you love to draft Magic cards, you probably already know about Cube. In that case, thanks for watching, see you in the next one. No, wait, please stay here, I kinda need the watch time. A cube is basically a custom-built draft set. Most cubes are sets of 360 to 720 singleton cards, curated by the cube's designer that can be drafted from 15 card boosters, just like a normal set. It's easy to forget that Cube, just like the EDH of old, is at heart a fan-made format. In 1999, only 6 years after Magic came to be, some draft aficionados came up with the idea of what they called a big box draft. This box contained every card in Magic's catalog, which was about 4,000 at the time. Around the same era, Guillaume Matignon, a former professional, created what he called Wajik, a small curated set of cards that could be drafted with as few as 2 people. This format caught on, and not only in the French pro scene. Soon there were all kinds of Wajiks and mini-Wadges. Mini-Wadges? Mini-Wadges? That sounds wrong. Mini-Wadges with different sets of cards and different restrictions on what could be included in them. A lot of these cards were proxies because, believe it or not, Power 9 and the lot were expensive, even back then. To get a sense of what players' experiences must have been like, here's a quote taken from the Lucky Paper article about the history of the Cube format I've been drawing heavily from in this section.
They were playing Power and even Contract from below at the beginning, but apparently they weren't playing for ante, so Contract was just a draw 7. Seems fair.
It's unknown who created the first Cube, but the formalization of the format probably happened in early 2000s Canada. Why is it called a Cube though? I get that the name Cube was way catchier than the unpronounceable French Wajik or the clunky big box draft. In a Blogatalk post asking about the name, Mark Rosewater tells us that he believes it's called Cube because most cubes were kept in a cube-like box, so just a fancier way of saying big box draft then? How disappointing. I have a different headcanon that's a little more poetic that I found in an old Reddit thread. In data analysis, a cube represents a subset of data selected from a larger data pool. Just like a Magic cube is a curated subset of the larger pool of cards the game has to offer. I can't confirm this version though. Ultimately, the origins of the name are probably lost to time. So the format grows beyond the small friend group that started it, and more people build their own variations. And finally, In a 2007 Magic Invitational, Wizards of the Coast included 2 cube drafts with their curated version of the format. Something we would now call a powered vintage cube.
Welcome to Essen, Germany for the Magic Invitational, 11th annual. This first format was suggested by Aaron Forsyth, something that he plays that he thought was really fun, what we call cube draft. So a cube draft is just like a normal booster draft. Instead of having all the cards come from one expansion, they come from the history of Magic. Yes, there are cards in here from Alpha all the way through Lorwyn. Every single expansion shown, all the power, all the cool cards from Magic are in here. Let's look through a booster pack. This is the actual kind of pack somebody might open up when they play this format. So you get Library of Alexandria, Rakdos Augur Mage, Battle Screech, Disenchant, Savannah Lions, Nimble Mongoose, Garrick Wildspeaker, Oath of Druids, Mock Sapphire, Withdraw, Gush, Goblin Welder, Ancient Hydra, The Abyss, and Imperial Seal. And this is a crazy, wacky, very fun format. I think you guys will really enjoy it.
If you hadn't heard about it before, this tournament put Cube on the map. A little tangent on the event. Tiago Chan, a pro player at the time but very inexperienced with Cube as a format, went on to win the tournament and got to help create an invitational card, Snapcaster Mage, which went on to become a staple in Cube design itself. The Cube of today is a format unlike any other. It's not just about the latest cards or the most powerful decks, it's about choice, curation and community. A cube is a handcrafted, bespoke collection of Magic cards carefully maintained by its creator to offer a unique drafting experience every time. It's a format that can range from casual to highly competitive, every cube a different beast, but most of the time a very personal piece of art. Do you want to play with cards like Black Lotus, Ancestral Recall and other pieces of the Power 9? Cube's your format. Are you sad that this one pet card you have isn't played competitively and even too weak for Commander? In Cube, that card can shine. Can even become a centerpiece of the design if you build it right. Do what feels fun to you. Just like a floral spusm, you can make your own choices. Cube truly is Magic's most customizable format. There are countless tutorials out there to teach you how to build your first cube, and I can't add much to that. If you need a starting point, Tolarian Community College has a great video on the topic to help you get on the right track. There's also an article by Melissa De Tora called Building Your First Cube on the official Magic website if you're into reading for some reason. But you could also always just copy the current cube list from Magic Online and print that out as a starting point. If you played it a couple of times, you'll notice what's fun to you and your playgroup and what isn't. Then go make your own thing. The world's your oyster, and maybe you'll find a pearl. Cube is a design challenge if you want it to be one. When Gwen Decker released Cube Cobra, an open source cube management tool in 2019, it instantly became the go-to website to build and manage your cubes. If you want to start your own cube, this is the place to do it. And just like with any other of these fan-made formats, not only can you shift the card selection in your cube to make it your own, you can shift everything you want to. You could include cards that aren't legal anywhere, like silver bordered or Acorn stamped ones. Make Form of the Approach of the Second Sun your win con and shuffle yourself into the deck. Why not? The mystery boosters available at most Magic conventions have so-called playtest cards in them. I've included some of them in my current cube. Bear with Set's Mechanic is a brutal green beater, for instance. And No Regrets Egret makes it so you can mulligan or not with more confidence, and it is still a 2/2 flyer for 2, which is a decent rate. You could go one step further and even put some quote-unquote real playtest cards into your cube, the ones you can get at Gavin Verhey's Unknown event at MagicCons. I'm partial to this Mage Retreat, a good value target in Blink decks. But there are many other interesting ones to consider, and they're literally just sticker paper on basic lands, so proxy away, friend! To come back to the theme of variants within variants, some people changed the rules of Cube further to create even more outlandish draft experiences. There is an infamous variant called the Desert Cube by Cube Cobra user Loxodon Meyerark. In this monstrosity, players have to draft all the lands they want to use in their decks. Nothing can be added later. This small change shifts the drafting experience drastically. Do you take a bomb for your deck, or do you take this basic land that probably won't come back to you a second time? This cube is set on a fictional plane with a whole backstory on why the resources of the draft are so sparse. I had a way tamer version of this concept back in the day called the Devoid Cube. You had to draft all the color fixing lands you needed for your deck, including basics, but you could add as many wastes as you liked after the draft was done. Andy Mangold's Degenerate Microcube is another example of pushing what Cube can be to the maximum. To make decks more consistent throughout and enable combos and strategies to play more like in constructed Vintage, Mangold lets you draft this tiny cube in 2 packs of 10 cards. The whole cube pool is only 160 cards deep, but fear not, minimum deck sizes are also down to just 15 cards and players won't lose the game if they draw from an empty library. This also shifts the present archetypes from the usual aggro, midrange and control to the arguably more degenerate archetypes of combo, stacks, prison and control. But that's the name of the game. I've linked the lists to both of these cubes on Cube Cobra below, so you can check them out for yourself. Maybe print them out and give them a go come next game night. There are whole cube communities online discussing worth inclusions and standing cubes from every upcoming set. If you're into designing your own cube, it seems you start to see set releases and even new commander precons with different eyes. Every new card a potential cube runner-up, even if it will never shine in any constructed format. These communities come together on their respective subreddits and Discord servers for the most part. But there are also conventions where cube is front and center. All over the world, big and small events are popping up, and there seems to be no end in sight. I told you earlier that every cube is unique and a representation of design philosophies of its creator. What my friend Gregor did is positively silly though. He built more than half a cube from scratch. And if you now think, more than half? I've made whole cubes from nothing before. No, you fucking didn't. He built this cube containing 196 cards he completely designed on his own. These custom cards have artworks done either by him or commissioned to be done by friends and fellow artists. That is so damn radical. I asked him to tell me a little bit about some of his ideas behind the cube.
So, hey, my cube tries to bring archetypes to the forefront that Wizards normally does not print much support for, like fortifications or kobolds, for example. So, in the cube, fortifications are found in every color, and usually give the mana produced by the fortified land an additional benefit, like giving a creature trample or haste. They can then be unattached for a bigger effect that can be repeated after refortifying. And I also came up with some new mechanics.
Steal X. Put the top X cards of target opponent's library onto the battlefield face down under your control. They're loot artifacts. Loot can be sacrificed to other cards for a variety of different effects, primarily in red, splashed in blue and black. Gravebound. New enchantment type. When a spell with Gravebound resolves, put it into the graveyard instead of the battlefield. If it would be put into the graveyard if you didn't cast it, exile it instead. If it would enter, exile it instead. Primarily in black, splashed in white and green. Size advantage X. This creature can only be blocked by creatures with total power of X. X is always below the creature's toughness, found only in green.
There are also some other existing mechanics that I wanted to put a new spin on, like vehicles that do something with the creatures that crew them. There are even some vehicles with Defender.
In fact, he sent me a lot more design concepts than these, but this video is already long enough and I think you get the idea. Get creative with it. I have also dabbled in designing a card for my cube because I thought it would fit into it. I guess the gist is, no one's stopping you. What are you waiting for? Design your own cards and put them into cubes. I love drafting and therefore I love Cube. I'd probably be playing it non-stop if it wasn't that hard to get 8 adult people into a single room. Getting drafts to fire can be a daunting task, but when it happens once in a blue moon, it's all the sweeter for it. The difficulty of getting enough people to sit down to Cube is what started the format we'll talk about in the last section though. What a segue. To be honest, I was a bit anxious to start writing this segment of the video. For the previous ones, I could just jump into old forum posts and dig around articles about the subject matter. For this, I knew I had to speak to the man himself, so that's what I did. More on that later. Vince, also known as Pleasant Kenobi on the internet, has a pretty cool video up about how this format works.
This is simply one small portion of it. This is about a fifth of it. I called it the party box, and the idea is that this gives you an even playing field for playing Magic, so that you aren't all playing Commander decks at different disparaging levels.
If you want to deep dive later, please check it out, it's linked below. The basics are as follows though. Party box is a miniature gameplay environment, much like Dandan. It can be played with 4 to 6 people that all share a library of about 200 to 300 cards and a graveyard. You start a normal multiplayer game by drawing for your turn and playing spells, etc., just like you would in normal Magic. Once per turn, you can play a card from your hand face down as your land drop. This land has all the basic land types and can produce any kind of mana. Wooburg, Colorless, Snow, you name it. There are no shuffles. If any card wants you to shuffle the library, you just don't. If a card wants you to search your library, you don't. If a card says you can search for a land and put that into play, you just take the top card and place it face down as a land. There's also no putting stuff under the library, because it's so big. Vince wants you to exile cards that would be put under your library. In my party box I found it to be more fun to play Scry as Surveil and put the cards into the graveyard instead. Also, any card that does not have a mana cost is free. There are tokens in there that you can cast for 0 mana, suspend cards you can get for free right away, and also Planeswalker emblems. Yeah, you heard that right. You can get a powerful emblem on the board by as early as turn 1, so you know games are going to get wild. And that's basically all you need to know when you start out. Well, almost all you need to know. The big thing that makes Party Box this weird monstrosity of a format is the non-Magic cards. In Vince's Party Box, there are a lot of cards from other games like Yu-Gi-Oh!, Pokemon and other TCGs that work well enough on the Magic's rule set. You can, for instance, play Yu-Gi-Oh! Trap cards as your face-down land, and activate them anytime by turning them face up if the situation allows for it. There's also Joker cards, cards that can be played as any card in the game that hasn't been played yet. It could be a Soul Ring, a Black Lotus, a Time Walk, you name it. It could even be a Silent Submersible. There's also one more thing you should know when playing for the first time that isn't apparent right away. The Party Box contains a lot of flicker wisps. Why is that? Flicker effects in the Party Box are super strong. If a face-down card, like one of your rainbow lands, would change zones, it enters these zones face up. So if you, for instance, play Blightsteel Colossus face down as a land early in the game, and you flicker wisp it, you now have a Blightsteel on your side of the board. Non-permanents can't re-enter the battlefield and stay exiled though. Normal Magic rules, right? Another notable card in the Party Box is Booster Tutor. It lets you open any booster pack and add a card from it to your hand. So the Party Box is growing constantly because cards get added to it. You don't need to open a Magic booster, even though it says so on the card. Why not use a Pokemon booster or a vintage 1995 Barbie TCG booster instead? I won't tell anyone. If the cards don't function on the Magic's rule set, make the rules up on the spot and note them down. This Lego Jurassic World card here got turned into a 6/2 for 1 black mana. Also it flies, like, obviously. Game states get crazy pretty fast, and someone attacking you down with a 82,000 power card is not an uncommon sight. Let's hope they can't give it evasion. In Party Box, unlike Commander, there is a level playing field. There needs to be no Rule 0 discussion about power level because it is all self-contained. Everyone has access to the same card pool, as absurd as this card pool may be. So you can make your Party Box as powerful as you like. Vince talks in his video about how he couldn't draft his old cube anymore because his friends moved away and he transformed the cube into the Party Box. He doesn't elaborate this further, but it seems like a huge leap from one format into another, almost completely different one. So I asked him how he came up with that.
The Party Box was originally my cube, so I had a cube while I was at university that we used to play semi-regularly, like in the local like libraries and such. And then like after university and towards the end of uni, as friends moved away and things, it was getting harder and harder to fire the cube. I also needed to sell cards in the cube for money because I was struggling financially because I was a student or post-student. So I ended up like keeping some parts of the stuff together that I really liked from almost like a Commander vibe. And I stacked it into this pile of cards that I referred to as the mini cube. And the initial like first draft of that was this game mode where you would draw one card in your opening at the beginning of your turn and you'd immediately cast it, put it onto the stack and resolve it. So it was fun to play just before F&M, but there was like zero agency and it wasn't really Magic even in the slightest. So then I moved towards the now putting things face down as lands to give it a mana system, and that was kind of what clicked with people and really enjoyed it. And then it became this thing that we played like alongside Commander. It wasn't like the complete alternative to Commander, but it was the thing that we could play at the end of the night when no one else, we've got less time, or I could play it with friends who don't have Commander decks with them, or I could play it with people who their Commander decks were much weaker than the other people at the table as well, because it's got like a power balancing factor to it. And then it became a mainstay of my GP traveling with all my friends from home. So we would play late night after day one when everyone scobbed out of the main event. We'd just drink and play Minikube, as it was called then. And I eventually changed it into Party Box simply because Minikube is not descriptive enough of what it is, and cubing involves drafting as a really important part of it, and there's no drafting in this, and I thought it was important to have the name reflect that.
How did you come up with the idea of flicker wisps in there? Were there always this many?
Originally, Wisp was just in there because I liked it. There may have been 2 copies simply because, there's one in the cube before and I stuck one in out of a folder at some point. But the interaction with like flickering lands that were face down to cheat creatures into play was discovered almost immediately and was thoroughly enjoyed by everyone involved. And it kind of bled from there, where over time I put more Wisps in to facilitate that gameplay pattern. But on top of that, when it started to become this thing that I wanted to take out to places, there was an element of, and this is going to sound, people might think I'm making this up, but basically Dandan had blown up before this, and I never thought it could be Dandan, but Dandan has an iconic creature, which is Dandan. So I was like, what if this format that is obviously basically almost like a parody of a Magic format, what if it also has a titular creature? And the joke I make to people is that the full format name is Party Box, brought to you and presented to you by Flicker Wisp, which is not the real name and no one calls it that. But in my head, that's what the format is called, because Flicker Wisp is the iconic card of the format. Originally, when we were changing the name from Minikube to Party Box, and by we, I mean me and a few friends that I'd mentioned that I need to rebrand the Minikube we used to play with, I toyed with the idea of just calling it like Flicker Wisp, for example, but I thought it just doesn't work as a name anywhere near as well as Dandan does. And whilst Dandan is absolutely essential to Dandan in terms of the gameplay, you can play Party Box without Wisp. I just don't recommend it because it's such a fun interaction.
So, when did the first non-magic cards sneak in?
The non-magic card thing is, again, kind of a byproduct of just like things lining up and working together, I guess, happenstance. So Booster Shooter was in there because Booster Shooter was already in my cube originally, and the ruling for it in the cube was that you opened a spare pack of cards. I think I had a 480, like a 520, whichever number works out that you have like several spare packs with an 8-player cube. So originally you'd Booster Shooter for something from there, and then I left it in, and just because the format wasn't a real format, I was like, just open the boosters you have on hand. And then I think the very first booster that got opened for my one was by my friend John the Baptist, as some people from my channel might know him as, where he had some Sainsbury's Lego cards or something that wasn't even a game, it was just like collectible cards, and we were just drinking and thought that was fun or something similar. And then it worked so well for the most part, those had to have rules made up for them, and we enjoyed it so much, and it became mimetic in nature. Like, the thing about Party Box is you include things that your friends find funny or the community finds funny, and this worked for that like massively. And then it also opened up this avenue for like weird game design decisions for people who want to make their own ones, as people start to copy the idea, where you start to include Pokemon and Digimon and Lord of the Rings and Yu-Gi-Oh and stuff, and it opens up like new ways to play in a way. And I think it also just pushes the format to 11 instead of a 10, where like you just get, it's just ludicrous. People walk past, see the board state, and like want to stop and ask, and I love that.
What is the thing people need to understand about Party Box if they want to start their own that wasn't obvious from your video on the topic, or that you have learned since?
So the reason I need to make a follow-up video is because having played Party Box a load, then played with other people's Party Boxes and talked to people about the concept of Party Box, there's some things from like a game design perspective that have come up. One is the idea of trying to make the game flow and not have stilted pauses. One of the worst things about Commander is long periods of inactivity, right? And Party Box is meant to aim at avoiding that. However, when you have tons of cards that aren't from Magic, or cards that need to be explained, foreign cards, or cards that are scribbled on badly, that sort of stuff, which mine has loads of this stuff in it, you have to explain it to people. So I think not having too many things from outside of Magic, I need to personally move away from playing with the foreign cards in my collection, stuff like that to make it more accessible, absolutely helps the game to flow. The other one is draw 7 effects. So that's your Wheel of Fortunes, your Professor Oak or Professor's Orders from Pokemon and similar, when you have those and the entire table has to draw a new 7, it just grinds the game to a halt as everyone looks at their 7. And there's loads of other cards that do that with like putting everything from the graveyard back into play, or like manifesting the top cards of the library for everyone and stuff. There are cards that are funny, Thieves Auction for example, but they just absolutely grind the game to a halt where everyone has to think real deep and go in the tank about how to play them. And I think they're like counterintuitive to the spirit of Party Box.
A thing to take away here is that a lot of what goes for Cube goes for Party Box as well, with the caveat that in Cube you only play one-on-one and won't grind the game to a halt for several people if there are cards coming up that they're unfamiliar with, especially if they have drafted them themselves. The easier the card is to understand, the better the flow of the game can continue. A draw tool like Pot of Greed from Yu-Gi-Oh! Or a direction change card from the game Uno will be understood immediately without having to pause. Aside from cards from different card games, consider playtest cards, unset cards, your own design cards, stuff you see on r/custom magic, but keep simplicity in mind for the best playing experience. You can also modify existing cards with a Sharpie. For instance, I lowered the mana cost of this split screen to 1 because it benefits everyone in this format, instead of just the person playing it like it would in non-shared deck formats. Just try stuff out for God's sake. Maybe you'll like it. What have we learned? I once heard the phrase, Magic is not a game, but 20 different games in a trench coat. And that's kind of true. Magic is a set of rules that can be played in a bunch of ways, some very streamlined and some as wacky as they come. It is such a strength of Magic to be able to bring to life so many different versions, so many games that can be picked up instantly if you already know Magic's rule set, which is intuitive enough by itself. No one knows who wrote the laws of physics or where they come from, but that we are here and can observe them is a testament to the fact that they allow us to be here in the first place. An infinite number of universes with different laws of physics may not result in humans able to look at them and go, well, they just work. This is called survivorship bias. A lot of Magic's variants of new imagined formats will never see the light of day because its rule changes aren't as fun, are too complex, or not working at all. For all the game modes we talked about, there are probably hundreds or thousands of formats that will never get there, and we will never know about them. There are a lot of other fringe formats I could have covered here but didn't, mostly because a lot of them are variations on the Commander idea, only changing card legality like Pauper EDH, or changing what is legal in the command zone like Pilot, Pendragon or Oathbreaker. This is nothing to say about the quality of or how much fun these formats are though, don't get me wrong. We could dive deeper into these variants as well because some aspects of them are quite interesting indeed, but that would be a whole other video. A thing that came up in my talk with Pleasant Kenobi is that there can be too many formats. How likely are you to build a deck in a format where you also have to convince your friends to build a deck to even be able to play against you? How likely is that to catch on in a meaningful way? I guess the fact that we even have a format like Commander where people had to build their own decks to even try it out is a wonderful coincidence. And probably a lightning in a bottle situation, a success as rare as they come. The easy to adapt formats are the ones that are self-contained, like Dandan and Party Box. Not unlike a board game, only one person has to bring it with them and everybody can sit down and play right out of the box. According to Stephen Hawking, there is not much personal about the laws of physics, but the laws of Magic the Gathering and the small rule changes of them in their respective formats are very much personal, I feel, especially when they are crafted by the players themselves. I fondly remember sitting in the lobby of our hotel after MagicCon Barcelona and talking to Sam about Dandan theory while our friends played with our decks and experienced the format for the first time. Sam talks in his video about letting people who never played Dandan play the deck and letting them discover the little intricacies for themselves and how that makes you proud of them and makes them feel smart for figuring it out. And I think that goes for most, if not all of the formats I covered here. If you just change one little thing about the game, like having a creature in the command zone you have always access to, or playing with a shared library or graveyard, it suddenly becomes a different game entirely. And since Magic is such a complex game with a vast pool of cards, who knows what people will come up with in the future? Maybe the next popular format has already been posted on some social media site and is just waiting to be discovered years later. I personally can't wait to see it. This is the part where normal video essayists let all their patrons crawl across the screen, and I can't do that because, well, I mean, I technically have a Patreon, but It's mostly for archiving the proxy designs I made and providing printable sheets of the cards to Patreons. So, if you're into this, and I guess you are if your algorithm suggested this garbage fire of a channel, I'll link it in the show notes for you to check out. The lovely people that already are subscribed are gonna be in the credits though. They didn't know this was gonna happen, so surprise, I guess. I'm off to play some Magic now. Just putting my Shrocks on for good luck. Somebody! See you next time. Bye-bye. Thanks to Sam, Spice, Rebel, Georgie, Skura, Gregor, Chase, and Vince for lending me their voices and sometimes faces or naked bodies for this video. You folks are awesome. And thank you for watching until the end. It really means a lot to me. If you did, consider subscribing because that will make sure I'll deliver more videos like that right to your doorstep. This thing literally took me like several months to make. I underestimated it quite a bit. This isn't my job, but with all that's going on in the world, it was a nice escapism. I hope you're doing alright out there. I love you.